The Planning Advisory Committee. I will begin by reading the land acknowledgement statement. On February 10th, 2022, we acknowledge that the sacred land on which Smith Falls is located has been the site of human activity for over 10,000 years and is rich in Indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We are also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We are mindful and broken covenants and need to reconcile with all our nation relations. Together, we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. All participants are asked to keep microphones on mute, cameras off during staff presentations and committee discussions. Participants wishing to speak to an application during the public meeting portion of this meeting will be called on by name one at a time during the public meeting. At that time, participant called on may unmute their microphone and turn on their camera if they wish to speak. If you wish to speak to or receive further notice regarding an application and have not signed in to the recording secretary, please speak now. Public participants will receive another sign-in opportunity when the public meeting portion of the meeting is called to order. I'm John Wanless, Chairman of the Planning Advisory Committee. I will now take attendance of our committee members and staff. Please raise your hand or declare your presence when I call your name. Jacqueline Grimes.
Present.
Councillor Wendy Alford.
Present.
Bill Widdenmeyer.
Present.
Councillor Jay Brennan.
Present.
Stephen McGuire.
Present.
Senior Planner Carl Greinke.
Present.
Planning Clerk Mary Remig.
Present.
To review, committee members are asked to raise their hand when they wish to speak. Alternatively, please find an appropriate opportunity at any available time to notify the chair verbally if you wish to speak. I'll now move to item number 2 on the agenda, approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Jay. All in favor? Carried. Item number 3, adoption of minutes. Planning Advisory Committee meeting minutes from January 13th, 2022. Can I have a motion? Moved by Jay, seconded by Bill. All in favor? Carried. Disclosure of any monetary interests. I'll now move to the public meeting portion of the meeting. Public meeting portion of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. Please be advised, you may leave the meeting at any time. Applicants, agents, and members of the public logged in to participate in this public meeting are asked to please keep their microphones on mute and cameras off until called on by the chair. If you wish to speak to an application and have not signed in with the recording secretary, please speak now. The purpose of this Planning Advisory Committee meeting is to consider 4 applications before us. Consent applications B22-01 and B22-02, which seek to establish an easement along the shared property line for each property known as 8 and 10 Phillips Street. And number 2, official plan amendment for OP-22-01 and zoning bylaw amendment ZA 2107 for 40 McGill Street South. The official plan amendment seeks to permit an entrance onto the subject property from McGill Street South. The zoning bylaw amendment will rezone the subject property to residential type 6 with a special exception to accommodate the conceptual plan for the development of the property. This meeting is your opportunity to provide any feedback in these applications, and the Planning Advisory Committee welcomes any questions and comments you may have. We encourage you to do so at this public meeting, as the Planning Act rules suggest that the public's ability to voice objections later in the process may be limited if a written or oral comment is not submitted. The Planning Advisory Committee is the approval authority for the consent applications. The committee will review the applications and any comments or concerns from the public to inform their decision for the consent application. The committee may choose to make a decision on the consent applications this evening. Town Council is the approval authority for the applications for amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw. The committee will review the applications and any concerns or comments that the public, which will inform their recommendation to council for their applications. I'll now pass the meeting over to our senior planner, Carl Greinke, to report on notification summary of applications B22-01 and B22-02. Following the presentation, I will call on the public participants one at a time to offer feedback, comments, or questions regarding the proposal. I will also offer the applicant in attendance an opportunity to address any concerns brought to the committee by the public. Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. For those I haven't met, my name is Carl Greinke. I'm senior planner of the town, and I'm going to be summarizing the applications that are before the committee this evening. So we do have a PowerPoint for the applications, and it's just getting loaded right now. So the first application, or the first two applications, are concurrent consent applications to establish an easement between 8 and 10 Phillips Street. The applicant and agent are in attendance this evening, so I'd like to acknowledge them, and they are available to for any follow-up or questions the committee may have. Next slide, please. So just to provide a little bit of background, the committee is familiar with this property. It's been, or these properties, it's been before the committee for through the development review process a couple of times. But to refresh, there's two 6-unit apartment buildings at 8 and 10 Phillips Street. These were rezoned back in around 2019, with site plan approval finalized in 2021, and construction is just about complete. Each building would exist on their own on its own separate lots. So the site plan approval that was granted by council in 2021 establishes the technical mechanics of the development. So that includes landscaping design, grading, drainage, servicing, all of the engineering requirements. The interesting thing about this development is, while it's proposed to exist on separate lots, the parking area would be accessed by a shared 6-meter wide driveway that goes right across the the lot line is roughly in the middle of that driveway, and that shared access would provide access to each of those parking areas. So in consultation with the town solicitor regarding this, there is language in the site plan agreement requiring that that access easements under the Planning Act be granted to formalize this access in perpetuity across the shared space to each parking area. So each parking area for each building satisfies the zoning requirements on their own for those buildings, and they are, I understand, each of the parking lots are reserved for the tenants of those individual buildings. However, in the event that these lots are sold separately, it's important to ensure that that joint access is secured in perpetuity, and that's what this application is intended to achieve. So it does not, the consent application is not to formalize or allow or accommodate additional development, but but administer the shared parking arrangement that's outlined on the site plan, since these are two separate lots. Next slide, please. So just to provide a broader visual of the area, technically these are two separate applications. Each application establishes an easement in favor of the other property. The easements are 3 meters wide, so roughly half the shared width, and extend 41.1 meters into each lot. Next slide, please. The draft survey that accompanied each application shows it in a little bit more detail what that looks like. Next slide, please. So this just provides the visual context of what the site looks like, and that's the middle picture shows the driveway in between the two buildings. Next slide, please. So the application in our mind is administrative in nature to implement the approved development concept. It creates definable easements to accommodate the 6 meter wide shared access to ensure that remains in place if the properties are sold separately. Of course, each parking area will remain separate, and this shared access, this comes as a product of the review and establishment of the site plan control conditions earlier on in the planning process. We've not received any operational concerns from any applicable municipal departments through that process. Next slide, please. The purpose of the Planning Act, before any consent application can be granted, we do circulate notice of this public meeting for two abutting property owners for feedback. I did receive a call from one neighboring property owner just seeking clarification on the purpose and intent of the application. I haven't received any, the town hasn't received any other formal feedback or commentary on that on the application. But in this case, before the committee is the approval authority for this application, and before they consider a decision on the application, it is an opportunity for the committee and the applicants or any public to discuss. Next slide, please. So as I just indicated earlier, we haven't received any feedback from abutting property owners on the application. Next slide, please. So if the committee is supportive of granting these two easements, we do recommend a couple of standard conditions of approval there. So I'll conclude this presentation and pass it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Carl. We'll begin by hearing from members of the public. All comments and questions need to be addressed through the chair. You have signed into the recording secretary and requested to speak to this application. I will call on you by name one at a time to offer your feedback. We have no public participation, so I'll ask the applicant if they want to speak to this.
Certainly. So I can just reiterate on Carl's perspective for this consent application. It's really to ensure that if the owner ever were to sell just one property, that they would never be able to restrict the access to the parking for any of the tenants. And I think Carl also touched on the fact that the easement doesn't interrupt any existing parking spots on the site plan or any tenant we currently have. So truly just an administrative thing that ensures whatever the ownership mix of the properties are, whether it's one owner or two, that everyone will be given access to their parking spot.
Thanks, Lindsay. Do you want to speak at all, Harland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I have nothing further to add. That was all summed up, and we're just satisfying the site plan agreement, which specifies parking, and as was stated, we require planning at consent to do that because it deals with parts of the property and not the whole.
Thank you. And I'll now ask the committee members if they have any questions regarding this. Bill?
Okay, the situation that is being proposed currently exists, and no one has complained or found fault. And so I can't really see any reason why it should not be granted. In perpetuity, I mean.
Thanks, Bill. Anyone else? Wendy?
I agree with Bill. This is common sense and it forestalls any future problems. So no, I support staff's recommendation.
Jay?
Oops, that's just a thumbs up. It's red
Yeah.
tape. Let's get it done. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jay. Okay, thanks to the committee. Has the task of making a decision for this application under Section 53 of the Planning Act. If the committee is ready to do so, I will now entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Bill, seconded by Wendy. All in favor? Carried. I'll now move on to the second item on our agenda here. The applications for OP-22-01 and ZA-21-07. I'll now pass the meeting over to our senior planner, Carl Greinke, to report a notification and summary of applications OP-22-01 and ZA-21-07. Following the presentation, I will call on the public participants one at a time to offer feedback, comments, and questions regarding the proposal. I will also offer the applicant in attendance an opportunity to address any concerns brought to the committee by the public. Carl?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a PowerPoint presentation getting teed up for these applications as well. So we have a combined and concurrent zoning and official plan amendment application submitted by on behalf of Lapine Apartments, or 45 Elmsley Street, which is this relates to the property on the other side of Thurber Street from the larger development, which is expected to begin construction very, very soon. So this is the former parking area for the hospital site. Next slide, please. So that is the property context at the corner of at the other corner of Thurber and McGill. Next slide, please. So the property is about just under 2/3 of an acre in size. It is currently vacant and historically used as a parking lot. Evidence of that, of course, still exists. And this property is proposed to be rezoned to construct stacked townhouse style development. Our zoning bylaw calls it a multiple dwelling house, but what's being proposed is 21 and 2-bedroom residential units. They would all be orienting towards Thurber Street, and the parking would be proposed for the rear and to be accessed solely off of McGill. A storage building is also proposed on the site. So the official plans designation for the area is the same as that on the larger parcel across the road, and it applies to the former South Unit complex and gives a little bit of design direction for how future mixed-use development would occur there. At the moment, the property is zoned residential type 4 that allows some lower and medium density residential uses and is consistent with most of the residential uses in that broader area. Of course, there are higher density uses towards to the north. Next slide, please. So 2 applications are being requested to enable the development. One is an amendment to the official plan special policy area. As I'd indicated earlier, it does contain a little bit of some design direction for how development should be accommodated on the site. It allows a variety of medium and high density residential and commercial uses. This proposal here is consistent with that. Each building face is proposed to orient towards each streetscape, some high level design that materials compatible with residential neighborhood. However, the policy is limiting in terms of parking from McGill Street. So the committee will recall that that an official plan amendment was approved to accommodate the previous development and allow a secondary access onto McGill Street. And this proposal followed the original proposal and the application. This proposal followed the larger development application, and the proposal is to further amend the special policy area to accommodate the residential entrance off of McGill Street. And before that application was submitted, there were detailed conversations with the Public Works Department to look at the best access and means for that area, given the local context. Next slide, please. So what's proposed is an amendment to the zoning to change the R4 zoning to a residential type 6 special exception zone. So that would be a special exception applying uniquely to this property to allow the multiple dwelling house subject to a number of technical provisions to accommodate the proposed development on the lot. So that would be creating a reduced front yard setback requirement of 4.25 meters. McGill Street being the narrower frontage is on this corner lot is defined as the front yard. The R6 zone requires the provision of a children's play area as to accompany any residential, any apartment or multi-residential development such as this. The proposal proposes to remove that requirement in this instance. They also propose to permit a driveway within 3.5 meters of a habitable room window and permit parking within all required yards. Next slide, please. So to support the zoning application and the site plan application that has more recently been submitted, a planning rationale was submitted justifying the application within the context of the provincial policy statement and our own official plan. Some the site plan and building elevations were submitted to outline to what the development is proposed to look like, as well as a number of other technical documents, many of which would be reviewed in more detail through the site plan control stage if the zoning is approved. Next slide, please. So this is the conceptual layout of the site. On the bottom is Thurber Street, and of course on the other side of Thurber Street is the larger Lapine complex that's where construction will be underway shortly. You can see the single building is oriented more closely to the corner there, and then the parking is proposed at the rear to be accessed off of McGill. Next slide, please. And the concept elevations in this case are similar. They are similar thematically to the proposed development on the other side of the road. And as you can see, they are also designed to accommodate the natural slope of the land. There's roughly a 4-meter drop between from the high point at McGill Street to the lower point closer to Elmsley. And then the image on the bottom shows the rear of the building facing the parking area. Next slide, please. And that just shows the elevations at each end of the building. Next slide, please. So this is the site context. The image on the left is the view from Thurber Street looking towards Elmsley. As you can see, there's an existing sidewalk. The image on the bottom right shows the property that is essentially flat but sloping down towards Elmsley. So it is cleared right now. It is cleared, flattened, and consists primarily of old asphalt. There is a bit of a retaining wall along the rear of the site that where it drops a little bit towards the residential backyards to the rear. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the public meeting, of course, is to involve the community and committee in considering a change of the land use rules for the area of land. It's an opportunity for the public to participate in the process, ask questions of the developer, and allow that an exchange of ideas that's so integral to helping informing planning decisions. So the information asked and received will help inform the staff recommendation and the committee's recommendation to council on the application. And I'd like to acknowledge the applicants and their agents who are present at the meeting and can certainly speak to this application and respond to any questions the committee may have. Next slide, please. And consultation is, of course, that integral part of the planning process. Before this application was submitted, the applicants did meet with town staff and discuss some of the technical parameters of what they're looking for, and Public Works has agreed in principle with the suitability of the access off of McGill Street. And notice of this meeting was of course given in accordance with the Planning Act. We've circulated abutting property owners, applicable agencies, and posted on site minimum 20 days before the public meeting. Next slide, please. So just a quick note on the process. So the official plan and zoning amendment relate to the land use and the broader principle of development, the use, the density, and the scale. So at this point, we're at the public meeting for that process. Staff and the committee will provide recommendations to council, and council is ultimately the approval authority on both of these applications. So if the zoning and OP policy are approved to enable the development, then the site plan review, the site plan application can be considered by council as well, and that's what gets into the more granular details about the stormwater management, about the servicing details, landscaping, fencing, building design. That's all been submitted as part of their site plan application, and we will of course work with the applicants and this committee on refining those details, and that's subject to council's approval as well. Next slide, please. So any planning application, of course, needs to comply with our guiding policies articulated in the official plan, as well as the broader provincial policy statement. We consider feedback to help us with that evaluation. We consider feedback from abutting property owners, as well as other agencies who have their operational expertise, and certainly when our official plan includes a number of policies related to traffic management and infrastructure and stormwater management, and we rely on RVCA, Public Works, and others to give us that technical guidance to help inform our recommendations. Next slide, please. So at this point, we're just at the end of the presentation here, and we welcome feedback from many members of the public as well as the applicants. The next step will be a report and a recommendation brought forward to committee of the whole, with the decision by town council and a 20-day appeal period following that. So I'll conclude there and turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Carl. We have no public participation, so I will move right to, would you like to speak, Pascal?
For some reason, my camera is not working, but we're really looking forward to getting started on this project. And this is a different type of essentially, it's a different type of product that we'll be offering than across the street. But I think it's going to be very receptive to the town of Smith Falls. And yeah, no, we're just looking forward to getting started with this.
Thanks, Pascal. Kayla.
Yes, hi, Mr. Chair. No, at this point, I think I would just thank Carl for his presentation, and all, of course, his efforts so far. And we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, I'll now turn it over committee members. Any questions? Wendy?
No questions, Mr. Chair. This is another development of a long vacant lot, which will provide the desired infill that we want to see, and in close enough to be very walkable to downtown. I also grew up 2 blocks from here, and I remember it as nothing but a decrepit parking lot. So in my opinion, this is a welcome development on that lot.
Thanks, Wendy. Bill?
Yeah, it should be remembered also that there was some mention made of a children's playground, but it should be mentioned also that just across the street is the school playground. And so there's plenty of room for youngsters to do their thing over there. And I don't think the school board would have any complaints about that. So it's a good location. I worked over there in that area for 5 years, and it would be good to see something of that nature fill that blank space. Because back in the days of the hospital, of course, that's where you parked if you went to if you visited the hospital.
Thanks, Bill. Jay?
Yeah, I'm very supportive of this. To have this go forward to site plan, and I look forward to the build. I grew up 3 blocks away, Wendy, as you know. Yeah, and I remember my parents parking in that parking lot when I got my tonsils out. But anyway, that's another story. But I do have some questions, but I think it's more related to when we get to the site plan in terms of garbage and snow storage and that sort of thing. But in principle, this is a great plan, and we look forward to it getting going sooner rather than later. Thanks for your interest.
Thanks, Jay. Jacqueline?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I guess this is a question maybe for Carl. Just while I fully support the concept, love the design of the entire project, just a question about the removal of the children's play area, because across the street, the applicant, correct me if I'm wrong, we removed the children's play area there as well. So we're moving it kind of back to back here. I don't think it's right to just say, oh, well, they can just go over there. What was the rationale for doing that, Carl? Or
Carl?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, Jacqueline, you are correct. Part of the application on the site across the road did also involve removing the children's play yard, and part of that proposal also included the contribution of a essentially cash in lieu of the playground that was administered through the site plan process, and that was, I believe, the first time in the town where we did that approach, and that approach was approved by council. In this case, the application just in front of us is simply to remove that as part of the site specific exception. Certainly, there is the school across the road that has a playground often accessible, but of course not always accessible. I'd in terms of the rationale for removing that, I'd actually direct that question to Kayla, if she can to follow up on that as well.
Kayla?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that the approach that Lepine was proposing is that while families would of course be welcome, they're anticipating maybe a different demographic for this site, they're not sure if a play area would be well used or appropriate. I think part of that was also due to the being at the corner of two streets, as well as the surface parking. There was, I guess, potential for a bit of conflict there. So it was proposed to, again, have the town secure cash in lieu to help improve other parkland elsewhere.
Thanks, Kayla. Jacqueline?
Just to follow up, is that happening then, Carl? Are we doing a cash in lieu?
That,
Carl?
Mr. Chair, that's not currently part of the proposal, but that can certainly be, if amenable if requested by the town and acceptable by the applicants, that can certainly become part of the proposal. But I would certainly look to the applicants to advise if that is something that they're willing to do. Will also just provide, take a step a little bit to the side as well with respect to the zoning requirements. As the committee knows, we are undergoing a review of our zoning bylaw, and one of the items that has been identified in the zoning strategies report by our consultants is looking at that is the children's play area requirements and the potential to broaden that to look at the possibility of children's play area requirements, but also the option of sort of other kinds of improved amenity areas to address different demographics. And that, of course, is something that's being explored through the draft, and the draft will be presented for public consideration in the coming weeks. That's a little bit of a digression, but I think I would direct your question, Jacqueline, to well, through the chair to the applicants to speak to that. But it was not part of the proposal that's been submitted, but they may be open to that conversation.
Jacqueline?
Yeah, no, just a further comment. I mean, again, I fully support this concept, but I just, as a committee, I feel like several of the previous applications that we've had, we've just, removed it or, have done cash in lieu. Well, at some point we have to step back and look at the broader picture of what our town looks like. If we're continually just removing these play areas and relying on existing structures, is that enough? I just throwing that out there as a rhetorical statement, but yeah.
Wendy?
Well, just to sort of, so the Parks Master Plan has been, for all intents and purposes, well underway, and some of those improvements, Highland Park is not that far from this property, and neither is actually Lower Reach. And those are two big parks, Lower Reach being huge. So I think certainly when we talked about the first development, because it's more adult living, that was my thought process, at least when we considered it there. And in this one, Kayla's comments, I was worried about less than 3/4 of an acre and a parking lot, and she voiced it too. And there are options for parks and green space. Never mind the school, but there are walkable options for two large parks from that property that we're talking about. So it's not as much of an issue for me.
Thanks, Wendy. Any other comments, Stephen?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The first comment would be, I think Pascal has his hand raised on Zoom. But just before that, I'm completely in support of this. The only thing I would like to see on the site plan would just be good visual barriers between the backyards of the neighboring properties, because I think that's a big benefit for their neighbors.
Thanks, Stephen. Any other questions? Jacqueline?
Mr. Chair, I think Pascal has their hand up.
Yes, sorry. I just like to add that we would be okay with doing cash in lieu. and doing something similar to what we did across the street for the contribution to go to improving one of the parks in town. That's something that we're completely agreeable to. And just regarding visual barriers with the neighbors, we were planning on putting a fence similar to what we did for 45 Elmsley with some privacy slats.
Thanks, Pascal. So are we ready to move on here with a motion or for council? Jay?
I'd happy to move staff's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Seconder by Wendy. All in favor? Carried. Thank you for attending and participating in the planning process of the applications OP-22-01 and ZA-2107. Any participants that have not signed in or require further notice regarding the application are asked to please reach out to the planning clerk, Mary Remig, by phone at Town Hall. Appeal rights as prescribed by the Planning Act will be outlined in the notice of decision. If you have any questions on this application or the process, I invite you to get in touch with our senior planner or planning clerk. This concludes the public meeting portion of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting. We will now move on to the next item on our agenda.
Mr. Chair, Carl has his hand
Carl's
up.
got his hand up.
Carl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking to clarify the committee's recommendation, if that is, if the committee supports the inclusion of a cash in lieu of children's play area, along with their support of this application. If that's the case, then that can certainly be incorporated within the staff recommendation and report to council.
You wish a show of hands?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
after Pascal's made that lovely offer, I think we ought to take her up on it.
Exactly.
Yes, Carl, I think that would be, to include that would be good.
Okay, so we'll work, we'll finalize that wording then. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, item number 6, priority issues. Carl, do you want to speak to those?
I was muted. I haven't done that often. So I believe is the first one the site plan application?
The first one is PAC 2206 site plan control application for SP 21-22.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll speak. I'll say a few words on that application. I think the committee's all pretty familiar with the project. We held the public meeting not too long ago to consider the zoning application. Just a quick update for the committee. Staff are working with the applicant in finalizing the terms of. You'll recall that the bonusing provision was the proponent was proposing to bonus additional affordable housing units in exchange for the increase in density, and we're just working with them on the mechanics of what that would look like. So that will once that's finalized, we will expect a council report just to bring that forward. But in the meantime, we have a site plan application here that's been submitted, and we're looking for some preliminary feedback from the committee. The site plan application is exactly what was presented through the zoning application. Just to summarize, we have a total of 10 residential units and 2 buildings, both 2.5 stories in height. The applicant is proposing 2 buildings rather than 1 in order to manage the scale and massing of development on the site to accommodate the broader neighborhood characteristic. 14 parking stalls are proposed. That is in accordance with the zoning. One thing that I like about this site is we're looking at shorter or narrower driveways. So an access to the site off of Lanark and an exit off of Bolton, only 10-foot wide driveways, 3 meters. And a children's play area is proposed to be positioned south of the proposed fourplex. In accordance with the zoning, they are proposing solid board fence around the interior lot lines. And so the visuals, the proposed renders have been included there. They are proposing a number of trees on the site, and as you know, there is the proposed bonusing. So the application has been circulated to other departments for comments. I know the Public Works Department is reviewing the surfacing and grading details, and we'll let that process unfold. And as with other site plan applications, we welcome feedback from the Planning Advisory Committee. I think there's a number of design and any comments on design, layout, landscaping, any of that. There's a couple of comments and specific, perhaps for the committee's direction that I'd be interested in your feedback on. And one of them is the adequacy of the facade treatment, particularly facing the streets. And I know we do have these conversations from time to time when we're looking at residential development. Do we want to see additional windows or balconies or architectural detailing to consider to enhance the visual profile and animate the streetscape? Is the committee satisfied with the color pattern for the development and also the adequacy of the proposed landscaping? In my preliminary review suggests that there is the opportunity for a couple of trees, at least on the Lanark Street frontage, perhaps elsewhere on the site. I think my preliminary concern was the layout is another thing too that I'd certainly welcome the committee's feedback on. Normally, we would be looking for a residential development, we'd be looking for the building at the front and the parking at the back to retain the streetscape, and that's what's proposed on Lanark Street. But it's sort of flipped on Bolton. They're proposing the parking lot along Bolton and the building at the back. And the rationale they've given in this case is that this makes sense because Bolton is, while a municipal street, it functions largely as a laneway. There aren't any other houses that front and access directly off of Bolton. It's largely rear garages and laneways. So their argument is it's not really a pedestrian-oriented, pedestrian-friendly environment. So having the parking there and sort of the building and the amenity areas to the rear is logical. And I think there's definitely merit in that perspective, and certainly I welcome the committee's feedback on that aspect of the overall design. So I'll pause there, but I think I just outlined a few things that I'm certainly interested in any feedback that you can provide. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Questions? Jacqueline.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess it's not necessarily, I have one question, but just to comment on something that Carl brought up when it came to the exterior of the building, the landscape. I'm glad you brought that up because certainly when I opened up the package and looked at it, it was boring and underwhelming, the exterior of the building. There wasn't a lot of visual interest at all. I don't really have any comment on how to make that better, but those were my kind of knee-jerk reactions when I first saw the exterior, the elevations of the building. To go back to some of the public comment that we had, certainly parking was a major concern. I think the parking suits on the subject property, but there was suggestions of no parking signs on the streets. Has any comment or anything gone further with that? Maybe Carl can answer that, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Carl?
Yes, thank you for the question. The comments on parking that we received were forwarded to the Public Works Department, and this will be presented as part of the report to council on the zoning. But what I can tell you is the Public Works Department they didn't outline any concerns with traffic and circulation there, but they're very pleased to monitor the situation and will certainly be ready to look at signage or other such infrastructure should the situation be warranted. But it is their intention to monitor for that and determine the need. I think it seems unlikely that I would, again, I'm not the decision would be ultimately up to council, but I would the staff recommendation would be to, I think, defer to the Public Works Department on that, and it's unlikely that the Planning Department would be looking for off-site enhancements such as this in a case where the site complies with existing zoning in terms of parking requirements. If they were looking for a parking reduction, then it might be a different story.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. With regard to landscaping, Carl, as much greenery as we can get on that lot that makes sense would make me happy. With regard to the, I sort of agree with Jacqueline. This is the same color palette as on Phillips Street, and I like it there, but it's a wide open street, and so it in this application, in these small tight streets, to me, I found the color palette imposing. And Jacqueline's right, I would agree. There's not much architectural interest on these buildings at all. So, and again, I have no suggestions to make as to what it could or should be, other than I found it sort of Spartan and uninspiring. And the color palette is perhaps one of the reasons I felt that, because these streets are closer together. Everything's closer together. So those would be my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Wendy. Anyone else? Stephen?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My personal perspective on it is that on a lot like this, if it was possible to have a single unit rather than having two separate units, it would somewhat address both comments of the green space. It would reduce the amount of small green screen areas that you have, but you'd have a larger green space in the back. But you'd also likely reduce your costs of building two different structures. So then you could increase possibly your cost of your facade or the architectural design of the facility itself. But I do understand that we're past that point for this application. Small suggestion, I don't know whether it would be addressing Jacqueline or Wendy's concerns, but if even since they only have windows on the outside, even false shutters on the windows might add something to the building itself.
Thanks, Stephen. I think the two buildings address the property itself because of the shape of the property. Because one building would, to accommodate what they're trying to accommodate here in units, would be much bigger than the one that's coming in off Lanark Street. And the shape of the property, like as far as the two buildings go, I think the project would be fine with the two buildings. And that makes the other building smaller, which would fit in with the decor of the houses that are on Lanark Street on either side of it. Carl?
Yes, I think Stephen's suggestion about the shutters on there as sort of that's a little thing, but I think that's a very, very helpful suggestion. But as part of the staff review and response back, I can ultimately it's up to the applicants to design, but I can make some suggestions in terms of some either some detailing or options they may want to look at. And certainly I hear the committee's perspective about colors. I guess my next question is the committee's preference a color that is more consistent with what we see in that neighborhood, such as a red or a maroon, or would a sort of a not as sharp a blue, but a more of a gentle color, would that be more the preference? I'm certainly happy to make any recommendations to the applicants on that.
Carl, thanks, Carl. Like I used to do a lot of these things. Are those the actual colors that they're going to use on the building? Or is it just a concept to give you an idea of what the building looks like?
The color renders they provided are just a concept. The formal elevations that were submitted along the site plan application don't identify, colors aren't indicated there. So I think there is a little bit of room to maybe explore some options there.
Yeah, well, I think that like on the concept thing, this might be all that they had to pick from as far as to put their concept in there. They may not have had any choice, depending on what the packages that they have to work with. Because if you look at the Lapine one, they've got two separate in their building. Is like two separate buildings with two separate colors, but those colors, like they could have had a lot more to deal with, or a lot more to work with than what's here. But I think Stephen's comment about the shutters on the windows would dress it up. False shutters would. Wendy?
Just to answer Carl's question, I think if this is not the color palette, this is all I have to look at this point, but I think a lighter color palette would help it not seem so spare or so imposing in that neighborhood. Most of those houses are not this dark. And so I think a lighter color palette, and that would be up to the developer to decide what, but I think a lighter color palette would be helpful.
Thanks, Wendy. Jay?
Yeah, I support the recommendation to support in principle this application. Whatever committee subjectively wants in terms of color and that sort of thing. I think the greenery is a great idea. We could make those suggestions, but at the end of the day, the developer has decided to invest, create more housing in Smith Falls, and I think that that's a great thing. So I wouldn't make. I'm sure that they have every intention to make a nice building attractive to people, attractive to the neighborhood, and I welcome suggestions from committee. But at the end of the day, I'm happy that this is going in. So I really don't have any suggestions about what they should or should not do with their money, and but I'm happy to support staff's recommendation. Thanks,
Jay.
Just to be clear, Mr. Chair, this is the comments committee was asked for by staff, so that's why we're commenting.
Thanks, Wendy. Any other questions? So do you need anything from us at this time, Carl?
No, I think the direction from the conversation and feedback from the committee is very helpful, and that's something that I can bring forward to the committee members, or to the applicants. And in my experience, they're certainly amenable to working with the town on these sorts of items.
Thanks, Carl. Okay, I'll move on to item number 7, correspondence items. We have nothing. Project updates, none identified. Our next meeting.
Mr. Chair, we missed one.
What did I miss?
Special exemption zones 6-2. There's 6-1 was the one we just discussed, and then 6-2.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just quickly quickly go through this. So as the committee knows, we're working on a zoning bylaw update, and we're in position to hopefully have a draft new zoning bylaw ready for the committee's review, public's review, council's review, and everybody's review within the next week or so, in plenty of time to be posted to the for the public meeting in March. So as indicated in the report, there are several dozen special exception zones that currentently exist to all of our zoning categories. Many of these have been there for decades and probably accommodate development that has either never happened or happened and reverted. And one of the things that we always look at when we're doing new zoning bylaws is how do we handle these special exceptions? Which ones do we want to keep? Which ones can we perhaps remove just for the sake of creating a more streamlined document? And there's definitely there's really no wrong answers as far as that goes. And in some cases, the direction's often to keep them. Other cases, other municipalities prefer not to. I think I've proposed a little framework that's intended to guide how we treat each of these special exception zones based on what they were used for and what has happened on the site since. I've deliberately kept it high level just to so if the committee is okay with this direction broadly, then we can take that direction and make recommendations on each of the individual special exception zones we have now, and that will of course come back to the committee and council to decide. Certainly, it's fair to say that in the event that we are going to be substantially changing individual properties, we are going to be directly reaching out to them and notifying them above and beyond the Universal Planning Act requirements to post an ad in the paper. But I think broadly speaking, the criteria that we've outlined, which has been sort of guided and inspired by the zoning strategies report that's appended to this report, suggests that if a use has been granted through a previous special exception zone and that use continues on the property, so long as it complies with the official plan, we keep it. However, there's a few instances I think that we can remove it. So for instance, if we allowed a development on, say, we allowed an apartment building on a lot that was too small, or we gave a number of setback reductions as part of a site-specific zone, and that apartment building is built, then there's probably little need to have a special exception zone in there. It just exists. So I think everyone has the report out in front of you, and with respect, I've outlined the situation, the recommendation for the new zoning bylaw, and a rationale. So as I'd indicated, this is just to give us some guidance on how to look at each of these exception zones. We will obviously be individually looking at them in the future, and there's always site-specific contexts and individual circumstances that the committee and council would look for. But at this point, I'm just looking for the committee's broad direction on by category on how you want to look at those. So I'll turn that back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Carl. Wendy?
Yeah, I'm particularly fond of cleaning up process and procedures, especially it appears during this term we've had a lot of that to deal with. So I'm really supportive, Carl, of making this, we're having this opportunity with the review to clean up some of the terminology, streamline things. 67 properties have exemptions. Maybe that could be half as many. So I'm really supportive of the direction that you're going in with this, and this is a perfect opportunity to clean this up too.
Thanks, Wendy. Any other questions? Thanks, Carl.
All right. Thank you, committee.
I guess I'm the only one that's giving you any support. Do you need more, Carl?
I think
I had my thumb up. I was like this.
Oh, did you? I missed your thumb.
that.
Okay.
Just general direction, I think.
Silence is golden.
Okay, we'll move on. Correspondence items, I've mentioned that we have none. Project updates, none identified. Our next meeting, Planning Advisory Committee meeting, March 10th, 2022. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Jay? Thanks, guys.
Bye.
We'll see you in March. We have 2 meetings in March.
Good evening.
Okay. As long as one's not on St. Patrick's Day, that'd be bad.
I think that's March break, so we won't.
All right.